Well, Church at the Creek, good morning. It's good to see you all today. And I just want to begin with this question. When was the last time that you felt overwhelming joy? Overwhelming joy. Some of you are anticipating the bake sale. You're like, that's going to be the next moment I experience it. But if you look back on your life, when was the last time you experienced, maybe it was your wedding, maybe it was the birth of a child or a grandchild, maybe it was the last time your favorite NFL team won the Super Bowl. We Cowboy fans last experienced that kind of joy in 1996. Some of you were not even born then. For me, one of the times that I experienced overwhelming joy for my wife and I, it was an overwhelming moment when we surprised our kids to go to Disneyland for the very first time in 2012. And they were so excited to get to go, and their joy became our joy as we enjoyed Radiator Springs. My girls enjoyed Cinderella's Castle, and we had the World of Colors and all the fun of Disneyland. After all, Disneyland claims to be the happiest place on earth. That's quite a big claim. And for some of you, Disney is just the absolute opposite, right? For some of you, you might not like long lines, big crowds, and overpriced food, and I get it. But I remember that day and that moment was a joyful moment for us. But I also remember after we were done and we went home, the next day we went to work and our kids went to school, and the Disney joy didn't go with us. You ever experienced that, where joy is connected to a place or connected to a person or connected to an event or connected to circumstances? Joy can be a roller coaster, can't it? And if you've ever had kids or grandkids or babysat some kids, and you look around and as a 2-year-old, you see in a toddler the roller coaster of joy where they can be laughing one minute and crying the next, right? And we go, oh, well, they're just toddlers, they're infants. But they're actually demonstrating without any inhibitions what we all go through, and our emotions are up and down. Maybe it's not every minute, but it's every day, every moment in the day. Or there certainly are weeks or months or seasons where it's up and then it's down, it's up and down. They're just being honest, and we kind of mask what we really feel. But it does experience like a roller coaster, this emotion of happiness or joy. And what I want to ask is, wouldn't it be nice if we were able to get off the roller coaster and experience a more consistent joy? And instead of being like an infant, like we saw last week, we move to maturity or to adulthood, as the Apostle Paul suggests is the goal. Well, last week we began a brand new series entitled, What Our World Needs Now. Remember, America right now is focused on who our world needs now, and we're looking at what our world needs now. And here's what we proposed last week. What our world needs now is for Jesus followers to become more Christ-like. And if you're not a Jesus follower here today, maybe you just kind of came in and you're checking out church, you're checking out faith, or you're reconsidering it, you would probably agree what our world needs now is for Jesus followers to be more like Christ. And then you might be asking, well, what does it mean to be Christ-like? What does that even look like? Well, that's what the point of this series is. That's what the fruit of the Spirit is all about. That's what Paul calls the fruit of the Spirit. This is what a Christ follower sounds like, acts like, or reacts like. This is the point of the series. It's really a list of virtues. And even if you're new to church or maybe you've been intimidated by the Bible, if you were to relook at it again, you've probably already heard of this list. You've probably already heard of the fruit of the Spirit. And what the Apostle Paul, who wrote them down, reminds us of right out of the gate is, you and I can't do this on our own. You and I can't demonstrate the fruit of the Spirit on our own. Now, you already know this because if you're like me, you tried to fake it and you realize after a while, I can't consistently do this on our own. So he reminded us of this right out of the gate in 5:25 of Galatians. He says, since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. We are dependent on the Spirit. To pay attention to the nudges, to the promptings, to the leaning of the Spirit, and learning to let the Spirit lead. So here's the list. Here is the fruit of the Spirit. Here is the whole what our world needs now. evidenced by the fruit of the Spirit. And I want you to read these out loud, but the fruit of the Spirit is, say it with me, read these next ones with me: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. By the way, this is our memory verse for this series. Why do we memorize it? Because we believe it just helps our life when we take these truths and let it shape us over time. But remember, when you look at this list, it is not a to-do list. It is a to-be list. This is who we want to become. The fruit of the Spirit begins with love. Love. Love is what we looked at last week because it's the primary demonstration of the fruit of the Spirit. All the other 8 that follow really flow out of love. The foundation of the fruit of the Spirit is love. And then there are 8 descriptions of that love. But everything flows out of love. And so we looked at love last week. And today we will focus on joy. But the fruit of the Spirit is love and then joy, the very first one. And so joy, what it is simply a deep experience of gladness. Just like we experienced that day at Disneyland for the first time. It was a lot of gladness. And the truth is, it's easy to start thinking of joy as an idea. And I love what Pastor John Piper says is it's really an emotion, not an idea. An idea you can force yourself to experience. An emotion you can't force. You can't force yourself to be happy or excited. For most of us, because it's an emotion, it's a roller coaster. Some days are great, some days not. Some moments great, some moments not. Some minutes great, some minutes not, right? It's always up and down. So here's the question as we kind of kick into joy today. Here's the question. How then can I experience joy more consistently? I'm tired. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of the roller coaster. I'm tired of hoping this next thing will give me joy and it doesn't. I'm tired of feeling good in this moment, but knowing it's fleeting, and then the next few days I'm back to where I was and I'm not experiencing the joy again. Wouldn't it be nice to get off that exhausted roller coaster? And then take it a step further. Wouldn't it be nice to stop chasing things that you know deep down won't give you what you're hoping they'll give you? That next new house won't give you the joy you hope it will. Having kids won't always give you the joy. Or you're worried that your kids will turn out a certain way or won't turn out a certain way. Like we're always chasing this thing, the next promotion at work, the next thing I'm always chasing. It will never give us what we're after. It's an exhausting chase, isn't it? And we're all on it. We're all on this chase. In fact, I really believe this. We used to believe humanity was on a truth quest. I believe we are on a joy quest. We want joy. We want this happiness. We want to discover this consistent joy. But how can we find consistent joy? How can we find joy on the mundane moments of Monday? How can we find joy at work on Tuesday? How can we find joy in our disappointments, in our frustrations, in our unmet expectations? How can we find joy when our Dallas Mavericks trade away Luka Doncic? How can you find joy when you feel like this? And by the way, today's Sunday. A lot of you came to church looking like this guy. You're thinking, I'm coming here to find answers for my grief. You're looking for joy. How can we find joy more consistently when life doesn't turn out the way we thought it would? Because for some of you, you're going through something hard right now. And how can you find joy in this season? How can you find joy when you've gotten bored with life or when you've found disappointment in your life? How can you find joy in those difficult moments? And I'll just tell you as a pastor, I'm paid to study the Bible. I'm paid to work with Christians. I'm paid to serve and work at a church. After all, I get to work for God. And yet I find joy difficult sometimes. And here's what I'm learning. It's a lot easier to work for God than it is to walk with God. And I don't know where you are in your life, but a lot of times I can work under God. I'm afraid of Him. A lot of times I can work for Him. I can be out in front of Him. But to walk with God, now that's a different thing altogether, isn't it? Joy. Where do we find, is it even possible? Let's be honest. Is it impossible just to have consistent joy? Maybe you would be a follower of Jesus and say, well, on this side of heaven, we're just not going to have consistent joy. But did you know that Jesus actually said that you can have complete and consistent joy? So we're going to read where Jesus makes this bold claim to his disciples who were about to go through really difficult times. It was near the end of Jesus' life when he's about to be crucified. He's talking to his disciples who are about to go through all kinds of unseen persecution from their perspective. And Jesus, before he releases them, says, and before you go through the difficult times, here's how you can have consistent joy. So Jesus claims it's possible. And so I want you to see what Jesus says. I want us to rediscover how to have consistent joy. And Jesus begins this talk to his disciples, and he begins by this famous passage in John 15:5. He says, I am the vine, and you are the branches. Now, some of you know this passage, and it's a really cool, especially if you've ever seen a vineyard where you have a vine, you have the branches, or if you have a fruit tree, you've seen the branches go off. And Jesus is saying, I am the source of life. I am the source of joy. And branches apart from me will die, and they will not have joy, they will not have life. They have to stay connected to the vine. They're branches that need the root source of joy and the root source of life. And it's fascinating because as Paul later goes on to talk about the fruit of the Spirit, he's actually borrowing from Jesus here, who's the one who introduced the idea of fruit. Jesus goes on to say, I am the vine, you are the branches, and if you remain in me and I in you. In other words, the word remain here means stay in one place. Make yourself at home with Jesus. That's how connected he wants us to be. Not familiar with, not occasionally connected to, but remain anchored in Jesus. And then he goes on to say, the result of that is, if you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much, say that next word with me, fruit. This is where Paul gets the idea. Jesus says you'll bear fruit. Now, what's interesting, we say, well, what does fruit mean in the Bible? In the New Testament, there are kind of two examples. One is there are people's lives who will be changed eternally. And then there's a sense in which you and I will be changed. Either way, in both cases, he says that other people will benefit because of us, and that will be the fruit. When you're following Jesus, others are benefiting. So the Apostle Paul, who's used this analogy of bearing fruit, borrowing from what Jesus said, but then Jesus makes something crystal clear. Watch what he says next. Apart from me, you can do everything. You can do some things. No, you can do, say it, nothing. Now listen, I find that hard to believe. Don't you? I mean, in your heart of hearts, if you look back at the way you and I lived this week, weren't there days we believed, well, apart from Jesus, I can do some things. Apart from me, I can do nothing? And Jesus is reminding his followers, and he's reminding us of the gospel. That Jesus came to earth to lay down his life for my sins so that I could have a relationship with a holy, set-apart God. And that nothing in me means anything apart from Jesus. And everything means nothing apart from Jesus. But I can have nothing, but if I have Jesus eternally, I have everything. Apart from Jesus, I can do nothing. The best part of me, I have nothing to do with. Jesus. Apart from him, we can do nothing. Isn't that a great way to start your day? To be more open-handed. Well, then I really need you. If apart from you, I can do nothing. That means I can't find joy, meaningful joy, lasting joy, apart from you. I can produce nothing that looks like joy apart from him. So like we talked about last week, there's a temptation in all of us to be impressive, spiritually impressive, but maturity is producing fruit, and I can't do that apart from Jesus. And so then he goes on to explain why this is important. Look at verse 8. This is to my Father's glory, Jesus says, that you bear much fruit, showing, remember, if the fruit of the Spirit is being displayed in your life, others will notice, you will show yourself to be my disciples. So producing fruit gives God glory, and it shows others that we're his disciples. So this is a brand new illustration at that moment where Jesus is the vine and we are the branches. Big deal. And then it's at this point in the story where Jesus shifts his focus from vine and branches to really the root issue. And I want you to see it in verse 9 where he changes to the main point. He says, as the Father, God the Father, has loved me, Jesus says, so I have loved you. Jesus loves us. And then he says, now remain in my love. So later on, the Apostle Paul would in Galatians 5:22 and 23, what's the fruit he begins with? Say it with me. Good, you're paying attention. Jesus says when it comes down to it, it's all about the Father loves him, and therefore he loves us, and he invites us to remain in him and to experience his love. In other words, this isn't a weird transaction where if you do something, then Jesus approves, then he, releases you and blesses you. It's not a weird transaction like that at all. It's all based in love. He wants us to experience his love, and he wants us to experience God's best, and that's by remaining in him. But how do we do that? Here it is in verse 10. If you keep my, say that word with me, commands. Now, if you're like me, I'm like, there it is. I knew it was in there. I knew there'd be a rule in there, and there was something I had to do in order to get the good stuff from Jesus. Here it is. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love. Well, we're going to come back to that in a minute because it's a pretty profound command that he's going to reveal to us. But he says, do this. In other words, Jesus says, you're going to have to trust me sometimes and trust my love. When you're reading the scriptures and you're like, wow, that feels tough. Wow, that feels hard. That doesn't feel like culture right now. And Jesus is saying, will you trust me with my commands? Will you trust my love for you and this world with what you don't yet understand? And he says, just as Jesus is saying, just as he has kept my Father's commands, and I, Jesus says, remain in his love. In other words, Jesus isn't asking us to do anything he's not doing. And he's saying, when you keep his commands, you'll experience his best. And then he wraps it all up this way. He says, I have told you this so that. And this is why I know what you're after, disciples. You think you're trying to overturn the Roman government. You think you're trying to get your power back. You think you're trying to get your civilization and your governmental, situation like you want it. Doesn't that sound a lot like our world? We think this is what we want. And Jesus says, no, what you're really after is what I've just told you. Look what he says. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you, and so that your joy may be, say that word with me, complete. This is that idea of maturity again. Your joy will be mature. Your joy will be consistent. It won't be the roller coaster anymore. It won't be up and down from moment to moment and season to season. He's told us all of this so that our joy can be consistent. What a claim Jesus has made. If you're looking for Jesus' promises, this is a really big one. He's told us this. He said, our joy doesn't have to depend on changing circumstances, but being connected to the one who never changes. Isn't that what you want? Isn't that what I want? To have the kind of consistent joy that doesn't change with the economy or the stock market. To have the kind of joy that doesn't change with who's in the Oval Office. To have the kind of joy that doesn't change with the next diagnosis from the doctor or no matter what's going on at work. But is that really possible? And wasn't there this thing about keeping commands that Jesus mentioned or referenced? Well, let's wrap it up with that verse. It's the next verse, and it's the last verse of this part of Jesus' communication to the disciples that we're going to look at. Verse 12, he said, here's my command. My command is this, that you love each other as I have loved you. Now, you wonder if the disciples in that moment go, all right, that's not very hard. Love each other? That feels kind of soft. That feels kind of passive. Love each other? I mean, I like this guy. I don't like that guy, but we can get along. What does it mean to love each other? But what they were about to go through, they would only have each other, humanly speaking, And to love each other means you had to look past the weaknesses and the frustrations and the aggravations of someone else. To love each other as Jesus loved us means that you would sacrifice for the other person. It turns out Jesus reminds them and us that we were designed to be in these kinds of human relationships with other imperfect people to remember, one, that we're imperfect also, but also to better produce the fruit of the Spirit and to become more Christ-like and to learn how to do that. And not to just learn information, but to learn how to apply the truths of Scripture to our 21st century life and to, like iron sharpen iron, to help each other become more like Christ. We're designed for biblical community. And being in biblical community actually connects us to Jesus. There's a couple of people who are in groups that made a video for us, and I want you to see from them. This is both Kylie and Shisala, who are in small groups here at Church at the Creek. I want you to hear from them today.
So I have been going to this church my entire life, and up until about a year ago, I was the person who just went to service on Sundays and then left pretty quickly after. I was never the person to stay late and talk after service. I always thought those people were kind of weird, like, what are you doing? Go home. But when I moved back from college, a lot of my high school friends had moved away, and my college friends were no longer with me 24/7, and I was struggling to find my new community. And I didn't exactly know which small group I fit into when they were first launched, so I narrowed it down to 2, but my struggle was that I would be the oldest of one and the youngest of the other. And so I tried both, and now I'm a part of both, and I feel like I'm able to connect with both groups in such different ways. And I love that this church has so many different groups to offer that it makes it pretty much impossible to find one that you don't fit into. And now I'm a person who doesn't just go to service on Sundays, but one who volunteers in kids, students, is a part of 2 small groups, plays on a church softball team, and I constantly find myself staying and talking way too long after service, being one of those weirdos. And this definitely wouldn't have happened if I didn't find my community through a small group.
Small groups to me means family, it means friendship. I was recently diagnosed with a serious health issue, and my small group has been there for me in so many ways, from making sure that they are praying for me and checking up on me, sometimes just to let me know that I am not alone in this journey. They are there with me, which means a lot. And I recently underwent surgery, and they made sure that during my recovery, me and my son had something to eat every day, so I didn't have to worry about food. And that's what family does. That's what friends do for each other. And I have found that in my small group family. And I want to encourage everybody, if you are not part of a small group, please do, because there's so many things that you can learn and find out from small groups. And I appreciate my small group, and I love them so much.
I love that. Yeah, we can clap for those stories. That's great. You know, and if I were a salesman, I would try to convince you that you not only should be in a small group, but you should do it for your own good. Well, now I'm going to take it a step further. Do you know one of the oldest research studies in academic history is a more than 80-year-old study around happiness, and it's around relationships and how one impacts the other. And Harvard University has actually declared that relationships are good for your health. Listen to this. People who are most satisfied with their relationships at age 50 are healthiest at age 80. It goes on to say loneliness, which we would recognize as an epidemic in our nation, is so deadly for your health that it's the equivalent of smoking and alcoholism. And now their conclusion to this study is, good genes are nice, but community is better. So join a small group. We are created to have life with others. And I'll just tell you, after the service today, just like we did last week, this is your shot now. I want to encourage you to consider joining a small group today. Just take 3 minutes out in the lobby today to take this step. Listen, we were created to experience this kind of connection with Jesus, and part of that is through loving other people, which means we endure their imperfections and they endure ours. But in that relationship, we learn to become more like Christ, and we find a more consistent joy. So if you haven't jumped into a small group, would you consider it today? Right afterwards, there are people who will be out in the lobby and they are ready. I think there's 19 small groups that have an opening. Some of them are brand new and they just want to welcome you in. They've taken a risk to create this small group, hoping you'll come. So go ahead and take that step today, right after the service. In summary, if you want to get off the roller coaster and you want to find consistent joy, it is connected to two things. Number one, remaining connected to Jesus. Jesus is the vine, we are the branches, John 15:5. And then number two is loving others, John 15:12. Joy isn't found in what we do, but who we're connected to. Now, my fear with a big topic like this would always be that you'll leave here today completely agreeing with the truth of it, and nothing in your life will change. And so what I want to do is make this so super practical in the last couple of minutes here. It was R.C. Sproul, who's a great Bible teacher of past, who taught to spell joy is to describe joy, J-O-Y. In other words, he said, it's the sequence of Jesus, others, you. This is John 15. Jesus is the vine, we are the branches, and we are to love others as we have been loved by the Father. And then we are the recipients of joy. Jesus, others, you. The problem is, most of us misspell joy. We spell it Y-O-J. We start with ourselves, and we think of our circumstances have to change in order for me to experience joy. I want something, and so I'm going to chase it so I can change my circumstances to experience it. And then I'll start thinking of others as a means to my end. And Jesus is there to answer prayers if I ever need it, right? If I really get in a pickle. So here's the question, how are you spelling joy? Joy starts with Jesus. Are you starting with Him? Are you serving and loving others in your pursuit of joy? Last week we saw that the fruit of the Spirit is less me, more we. And it is so tempting in the quest of joy to make it more me and less we, right? In fact, most of us will try and chase something outside of us to give me joy. And this is outside in joy. This is the idea, if I can change my circumstance, if I can get the promotion at work, if I can get more money, if I had a new relationship, if I could fix this problem that just showed up in my life, this burden that I've been carrying, I want to have kids. I wanted to have grandkids. I wanted to have a better marriage. And we start thinking of all these things that if those things could change, I could finally, we're looking outside in joy. We're looking at our careers, our bank accounts, and things that we have to give us joy. But Jesus here, He introduced a completely better way. He introduced inside out joy. And this is instead of chasing outside joy, it's cultivating inside joy. I just want to real quick, here's what it can look like. Where inside joy that's cultivated can turn envy into contentment. I can stop wishing that I have what you have. And I can be content with what God has given me. Joy, when it's inside out, cultivated joy turns greed into generosity. And I realize that life's not all about me anyway. It's why some of the happiest people I know are the most generous people I know. And inside out, cultivating that kind of joy turns grumbling into gratitude. After all, because of what Jesus has done for me, why wouldn't I be grateful? We have so many reasons to be grateful as followers of Jesus. And this cultivating this inside-out joy turns I have to into I get to. There's purpose in all that you do, in all the places that you and I go. After all, I don't just have to go to work. I get to show Jesus to my coworkers. What an opportunity before us. And finally, joy turns fear into faith. This is that inside-out cultivation, even in the dark moments of grief and pain. That we recognize, and in context, we remember that Jesus rose from the dead. Therefore, there is more to this life than this life. And I rest in that, even in the difficult days. So are you spelling joy? Jesus, others, then you. And here's the warning. You will not be able to wake up tomorrow morning and suddenly have consistent joy. It has to be cultivated. Jesus used this gardening illustration, which takes time, it takes seasons, it takes intentionality. Joy isn't something that you chase. Joy isn't even something you choose. It's something you cultivate. It takes time. I remember when I was a kid, I was trying to learn to play the piano, and I was so impatient. And by the way, one of the fruits of the Spirit, I'm teaching on in a couple of weeks, so pray for me on that one. But I wanted to play effortlessly. I wanted to play my favorite songs, and I wanted to sound great right away. But every time I sat down at the piano, my fingers would just fumble over all the keys, and I kept thinking, why isn't this happening faster? And I remember my mom telling me, you can't rush the process. You got to play a lot of wrong notes a lot of times before your fingers learn where to go. It was frustrating, but little by little, notes and chords started to kind of come a little more naturally, and eventually what felt impossible started to become second nature. Joy is like that. We want to wake up tomorrow and immediately feel consistent joy, but real, consistent, mature, complete joy is cultivated over time. Just like learning an instrument, joy can become second nature if it's cultivated from within. So back to our original question, how can I find joy consistently? Well, joy starts by connecting to Jesus and loving others. J-O, what's missing is the U, right? Joy isn't found in what we do, but who we're connected to. I want to remind you of the story of Harriet Tubman as we close. She was born in slavery around 1822 in Maryland, and she endured severe beatings, had a traumatic head injury as a child, and caused lifelong health issues for her. But somehow she never lost faith and joy in God. In 1849, she escaped slavery. This is more than a dozen years, a little more than 10 years from the Civil War. And she settled in Philadelphia. And she returned at great personal risk to her to lead dozens of others to freedom in the Underground Railroad. And eventually, later in her life, she was a nurse, a spy, an activist, and she continued serving, and she eventually settled in Auburn, New York, where she established a home for elderly African Americans. And she would often say, I said to the Lord, I'm going to hold steady on to you, and I know you will see me through. Joy didn't come easy for Harriet Tubman, but her trust and connection to God and her unwavering commitment to love others allowed her to have consistent joy even in difficult circumstances. See, joy isn't found in what we do, but who we're connected to. So it begins with Jesus. It begins with being connected to Him. Jesus is the vine, we are the branches. So I want to make this super practical this week. If you haven't done it already, would you consider downloading this app? This is a Bible reading plan that actually goes along with this series. It's 5 days a week. You can go to this URL. You can go to our church app. You go to our homepage. You'll find it as well. But it's a way of you staying connected to Jesus, remaining in one place with Him, and taking a step toward joy. And then, like I said, one of the things I want us to do in this series is to memorize this passage, Galatians 5:22 through 23. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask everybody to stand. We're going to say it together. And I want you to say it out loud with me. And you keep coming over the next few weeks. We're going to have this to memory, and I believe it'll be a great tool, a great truth to have in your heart. So would you say this one out loud with me? But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Galatians 5:22 through 23. Joy isn't found in what we do, but who we're connected to. Remain standing. We're going to do something a little different today. First, if you are a small group leader, I want to go ahead and dismiss you right now to go ahead and go to your table, those of you who are hosting the tables out in the lobby. And then secondly, I'm going to close this in prayer here in just a second. And I just want you to know we're going to close a little differently. Normally we close with a song. Today we're not going to close with a song. I'm going to pray, and then I'm just going to dismiss you today. So if you're not in a group, I want to invite you today to take that step by going out into the lobby. If you're already in a group, I want to invite you to go straight to the bake sale. And let's send some kids to camp this summer. All right, let's pray. God, I thank you so much that in this life we know ultimately it's not a truth so much that we're after, but it's joy that we're after because you've made us for joy. But not just any joy, it's your joy. And apart from you, we'll keep doing what I've done, and that is just be on this roller coaster from day to day, from moment to moment, from season to season, up and down, just like a toddler. Thank you for loving us so much that you reveal to us that we can have joy by being connected to you. It's not in something that we do, but who we are connected to. So may our joy begin with you, Jesus. I pray. In your name, amen. God bless you. We'll see you next week.